Everyone, it's Fair System here. Doing something together because we wanted to get something out. No promise this is going to be any good as a video, but we're trying. The thing we're going to be talking about, to some degree at least, is why this time of year can be difficult for people with TBMC. The shortest possible answer to this is simply that, there's a lot of trauma dates around this time, specific dates that lead to often more specific, worse cases of violence and abuse than you get most of the year. It's reasonably common for there to be ritual dates around now, for example, especially today, than it's being recorded and put up. So, but I hope it goes up today. Might take a little bit. We'll see on that. We'll see. The other option, is of course that simple fact that it's generally seen, or another major factor is that it's seen as a time for family, right? And for seeing blood relatives and having pretending to have a good relationship with them for the time, right? And that's inaccurate to our experience. That's not our life. That's well, we had to pretend all of that, but it was always that a pretense. So it can be difficult to accept that, everyone's when the world is telling you you should see people that you can't see because seeing them is dangerous and hurtful, then it can be hard to cope, just based on that. And it's completely understandable to be struggling because this is a hard time for people. Anyone who's had to cut off, people and haven't got a found family yet, or will never have a found family, in that sense, then this is a difficult time. And, there's on a more personal, we suppose, level, we have problems with, there's, expectations placed around now regarding gift giving and the like, which are, they're not, something that everyone's going to struggle with, but we find really difficult because it's not something we're good at or understand particularly well. It's a difficult thing for us to wrap our heads around. Is this expectation that we're going to be somehow these all-knowing, all-seeing, masters of gift giving who know exactly what to get people and what a sensible budget for people is and what's an acceptable budget for people and all of that. None of that's easy as far as we're concerned, and that's all of that is expected right now for, always was in the past expected for a large number of people, and that was always difficult just because we got it wrong, right? Things would go wrong for us, and that's not a comfortable position to be in. It's not a safe. It was never safe. It was always effectively gambling with our knowledge of people, our understanding of people to get things that they would appreciate and not find to be, demeaning or insulting or anything, without and not asking much of people either. Despite, it's like we're being asked for so much from people, and then we can't ask for anything in return, really, because there was things. It was never going to be returned as a thing, because it couldn't be returned as a thing for, like, that wasn't how it worked. The expectations were always for us to do everything in our power to cater to other people in the household, but we were never the ones to be catered for, because we were expected to, be able to take or manipulate people into giving, right? Because that's how it worked. That was how it was, that was the expectation, was things were never freely given. It was always a push and pull of manipulation and power and violence. But the problem there was, like, how could we compete on that we could never compete with adults on that when we were younger, and then even as we got older, right? You can't compete truly. Like, that just doesn't exist as an option when when you're dependent on people for survival. You simply cannot compete in the push and pull of I do X, you do Y, and then we both get what we want, because what I want is food, a space to sleep, it's water, it's it's the things you need for life. And so, when they say you do X because otherwise you don't get to eat. It's not great, and it's difficult to accept, it's difficult to understand, difficult to come to terms with. And but that was the truth for us, and that was just safe life. That was the stuff that was safe and easily remembered, was the push and pull of do what I say or things go wrong, and manipulating people, pulling people certain directions, all of that, and that's not a healthy environment. But healthier than the other environment we were living in, where violence was the language used most of the time, like exclusively, and direct actual physical violence mostly, and where we were participating unwillingly, of course. Well, yeah, say of course, but it doesn't seem like that was the case for everyone there. Can't say for sure because we're not those people. We don't know what put them in a position to be setting these things up, but for all, the family was apparently vegetarian and opposed to killing, plenty of stuff died, and that's just, yeah, that was just how it was. That was our life, was dealing with the fact that, we should be say, that at this time of year, the fact of my life was, you shut up and you get on, and you kill the things that are expected to be killed, whatever they are. It doesn't matter. know, oh, and, we're not necessarily opposed to, say, killing an animal for its meat, for food, but it it was never that simple, it was never just, you know, preparing a feast or whatever. It was always, this thing is being sacrificed, right? Not eating it, taking away something's life in a generally relatively cruel and unpleasant manner, right? For nothing, really. And that's uncomfortable, It's unpleasant. It goes against what we were, what anyone reasonably understands as the right moral choice, Like, that's not how things are supposed to be done, apparently, but that's how they were done, so, okay, that is how things are supposed to be done, apparently. Don't agree with that, but, that was how things were, so it's hard not to some degree, still see that as the way things should be, You want a good year, what do? You kill and sacrifice something cruelly, you perform a ritual, and, the more important that thing is, the more likely the ritual is to work, and more likely you are to have a good year. And that means that if it's been a bad year, it's the limit doesn't exist, right? The limit to what's acceptable there does not exist beyond, how bad a year have you had? And, it's, it doesn't work, of course, but except it does is the problem, right? Because it does work in those organizations, because you do more there, you show you're more dedicated to the cause, you're more loyal, you're less squeamish, you get the better, you get a better time for the year, for at least for a little bit, because there's less doubt, there's less mistrust of your loyalty, which means that there are benefits to that. But say benefits because they sort of are, but it's a weird one to call, it's one of those things where it's like, is it truly a benefit to be, the one unwillingly performing horrific acts rather than one who, yeah, it is a benefit, but you're not safe. You're still not safe. You're still not having a good time. You're still not in you're still in a traumatic location. It's and being traumatized. It's just that the specifics of the trauma, they become lessened somewhat. And that's difficult to come to terms with in some ways, because you kind of have to accept that your life was improved mildly by doing this horrific thing that logically, of course, doesn't actually directly improve your life, but, you know, it sort of did. And just don't know how to come to terms with the fact that, you know, how do you come to terms with that truth? You know, how do you come to terms with the fact that you did that what happened, you know, because you don't want to accept that, you don't want to believe that, right? It's not comfortable, it's not safe, you know, but, you know, that's the problem though, is of course, you know, you speak out later in life, you know, if you've stayed in at all as an adult, you speak out with evidence that's going to include you, and then suddenly you're implicated as well, and there's no way of, you know, as long as it can't be proven that you were an unwilling participant, suddenly for you to come forward becomes a nightmare, you know, where you're then being punished for things that you never wanted to do, that you were pushed into doing, but there's no evidence to prove you were being pushed into it, so of course, what does that matter, right? Tell you exactly what it, you know, it matters an awful lot, but to the court of law, it doesn't matter, right? To the court of law, you did this thing, and there's no extenuating circumstances, right? And you were of an age where you'd be held criminally responsible for it, right? If you've got evidence, and if you don't have evidence, well then, it definitely doesn't matter to the court of law, because it's never getting there, right? Right? Because without physical evidence in some form, right, your testimony alone is never going to be enough, right? Not because, you know, have a dissociative disorder, right? Your memory is fallacious, and there are enough theories going around, you know, false theories about how memories can be falsified and the like, to where no one is going, you know, without physical evidence, that belief isn't going to be there enough. So, you know, don't like saying that, but it's the truth of it, you know. If it's safer and easier for, well, yeah, it's safe and easier for the individuals who are doing this, not for the world as a whole, but, you know, it's much safer and easier to believe that people are good people, that, you know, certain things just don't happen, that they're, you know, somebody's fantasy that they've got misconstrued with real life. But fantasies like that, even if they are a fantasy, fantasies like that don't come out of nowhere, right? Even if the specific event that they're describing is, you know, didn't happen, right? You don't come up with these ideas from nowhere. You don't. You certainly don't get flashbacks to events from nothing, right? You know, PTSD doesn't come from nowhere, right? The idea that that is so easily changed and so, you know, the idea that it's so easy to manipulate someone into completely fallacious beliefs on their past is unfortunately widely enough held and completely ridiculous. You know, it doesn't work like that. If it worked like that, then, well, that's, you know, the problem is if it worked like that, right, there'd be too much risk, right, to doing things like that in many ways, because all it it becomes much easier to put people, you know, for the story to get large enough, because, you know, a load of people get manipulated into believing something, then suddenly you've got a problem on your hands, because a large group of people believing something like that, you know, questions might actually start to be asked then. And then, even if, you know, 80% of those memories are false, that's not 100%, and that's enough, you know, because enough people do that, then an actual, it stops being a problem the authorities can ignore or be actively involved in themselves. You know, we're not throwing accusations at anyone in particular with that, but more generally, you know, it's not like police and the like don't get involved, right? Police and the, you know, police, teachers, politicians, celebrities, you know, people who are used to having power struggle often to truly tell when something is, you know, an abuse of that power, because they're so used to having power to abuse. And that's not, it's not to say it's always the case, but, you know, there's always a risk when it comes to people, right, who are used to power, and that, you know, the how commonplace that abuse of power becomes. And so then, of course, I'm far more likely to turn a blind eye to, or, you know, actively engage in other horrific acts of, you know, power expression, because that's normal to them. I'm not saying that's right or moral, that's just how the world works, right? So, yes, no, you cannot trust people in positions of power to take these things seriously until a significant enough portion of people are all, you know, until a significant portion of people are talking out, or there's physical evidence that doesn't implicate them, you know, or even physical evidence that does implicate them, in which case, depending, right, on the position, then yeah, maybe you can force change with that anyway, because you've got blackmail material essentially, but not going to suggest that's the right thing to do. And honestly, attempting to collect physical evidence for these things is a surefire way to get, well, not certainly surefire, but is a good way to get quite hurt. So, wouldn't necessarily recommend it, you know, especially if you've, you know, if you've gone through it yourself already. Going back in to try and collect physical evidence is a good way to end up just being stuck back there, right? That's not guaranteed, but that's a concern in those instances. So be careful with that. If you make that decision, it's not a decision we would recommend. And if you weren't involved, getting involved, right? Getting involved like that is dangerous, because there's always distrust of new people, of strangers who haven't been involved, who haven't gone through similar themselves, right? Of, especially if you're not useful to the organization in some way, well, even then, right? They're going to be very slow and cautious about what's shown, because can't trust that you aren't collecting evidence, right? That's the point. Until you're so implicated that it really doesn't matter anymore, right? That you're in a position where you can't speak out because you're too heavily implicated. They're not going to just let you collect physical evidence, right? Unless that physical, you know, anything where you'd be implicated, anything where you can gather physical evidence, it's likely to implicate you heavily, right? Trying to collect evidence that they're creating CP, well, better buckle up and make some, right? And now they've got that of you, and good luck not, good luck trying to convince a court of evidence that you aren't also a problem, and you don't also need to be locked away at that point because you've done the exact thing you've brought evidence forward of, right? That's it. You've done this thing that you're attempting to condemn, right? You lose your moral high ground, you lose everything the moment you do that, because you made an active choice there. And so, that's, it's one thing for someone who's been caught up in these organizations and has been traumatized and put in a position where they really can't know right from wrong properly because, or even might even know properly, but also know that they have to do whatever it takes to survive, and a lot of the time that involves doing things that are wrong, right? That are immoral, right? But if your choice is do this immoral thing or die or get severely hurt yourself, right? You will choose yourself 9 times out of 10 because everyone does, right? Not saying that's right, just saying that's what people do, because why wouldn't you? Not saying, of course, and not wanting to condemn that behaviour because, to condemn survival behaviour that's survival driven is ridiculous. Can't say it's right, but it's not wrong either. Because if that behaviour is wrong, then, well, guess we should never have survived. That's the thing. We can't condemn that behaviour. Condemning that behaviour is like, would be saying that we don't deserve to have lived, right? That we should have said no. We should have stood up to people we couldn't stand up to. That's ridiculous. There's a question to be made when people unless someone chooses to get back into it, or from a position where they're actually manage to run out most or all of the influence, which I'd like to believe is possible. Okay. If someone's in that position and they choose to go back, well, either they haven't actually run the influence, it was a false reality set running, right, to make them believe they've thrown off the influence, which is something we've seen. It's not common, but it's something we've seen. Oh, can't speak on commonness, definite for certain, but it makes sense that it exists. And we've seen it exist. It's interesting to engage with those people often because when you're in, they have somehow managed to come up with logical reasons for how what they're doing is acceptable behavior because they can't, it's not really a logical reasoning, but the idea that what they're doing is actually wrong cannot be allowed to exist because otherwise, that breaks the false reality. So you've got these people that quite clearly have tricked themselves into believing they're doing right and moral and behaving morally, when anyone looking in on that can tell that they don't truly believe it, and they there's a level of disrespect for people who haven't quote unquote gone out and returned, because they see them as weak-willed and weak-minded, because they have to believe they're stronger, when in actuality they're in exactly the same position. And it's interesting to see. It's interesting to engage with. Of course, it's also sad and upsetting to see, because it begs the question: can you truly wipe? Or is the influence, or is that always going to be falsehood? And that's not something pleasant to consider, because you kind of have to believe you can wipe the majority of the influence, because in some ways, otherwise, what's the point? So, we choose to believe that we can wipe the influence, and that it's not going to always be a false reality. And we choose to believe that we can be better, right? That we will do better, because we have to believe that. It's not necessarily true, but we have to believe that, because the other option is giving up. And to give up is to cause the loss of life, right? It's as simple as that. Not, that's the lowest possible cost is one body's life, and that is still a cost that we don't see as an acceptable alternative. If it comes to light that the beliefs that we're holding are false, then, well, we'll see how it go. See what we can do to keep holding on to beliefs that are seemingly false, that we need to keep going, right? Because we're not going back. That's not happening. Well, can't say that's certain, but there's no world in which there's no way in which we would willingly go back, unless someone manages to push through a significant amount of work that's been done to to break down our to allow that understanding to come through at all. And then also just the understanding of the pain and suffering, right? If someone gets in a position to do all of that, then can't say certainly wouldn't go back, because at that point, that's all our progress gone, and all of it, right? Is someone to have to wipe through all our progress to make us go back, which might be doable, but difficult, especially given that's the problem with setting up a gatekeeper with significant control over front memory, is when they get to a point where they're deciding that front needs access to some amount of the pain and suffering, right, and some understanding of that, well, suddenly the same structures that was built and constructed to keep secret and control is working against, and so, you know, we have an advantage there effectively. You know, it's not a huge one, and it's not perfect because, you know, there's still a lot of controlling tendencies and distrust and all sorts there. It's just there is at least agreement on that refusal to go back, which means for that not to be the case, there has to be the removal of someone who has been, you know, not the top of the, you know, not head honcho, but in many ways head honcho of at least front for a very long time, and was put in that position deliberately and given a significant amount of power to hold that position and hold it effectively, right? To do what's been desired, right? To control memory, to control front access, all of that, right? That was all deliberate, and to wipe all that out and start again, well, it's doable, but it's a lot of work, right? Doesn't mean it can't happen, doesn't mean we're safe, just means that there's difficulty there, you know, there's work that can be done, that could be done, right? It's not a perfect system. Clearly, it's not completely safe. You know, it doesn't make us completely safe, but it does mean that that work is slow, difficult work that's more likely to be caught, you know, and pushed against. It, you know, isn't guaranteed that it won't go ahead. You know, none of this is a guarantee of safety by any means. It's just, you know, we can at least try to keep ourselves safe and to push against that, you know. We can hopefully try and keep track of enough to stay safe enough. Have to see, of course, you know. This system signing out. Hope to catch you all next week. Please do remember to like, subscribe, comment, especially if you've got any questions you want answered. Be happy to answer them either in the comments or in another video. So catch you all next week.